Hello, my name is Evan Byers, and for my term project for the disease I've picked is bovine brucellosis. So the first thing we need to talk about is what is brucellosis and how is it really contracted and what's the cause of brucellosis in general. So brucellosis is a bacterial infection, mainly found in ruminants, but can also be passed to people through uncooked meats, unpasteurized milk, and even working with the infected animals. It's a serious disease caused by a bacterial infection, of course, and is known scientifically as the genus Brucella. And there's three types of Brucella. Brucella abortus, which is the primary type that causes brucellosis in cattle, which is the one I'm going to be focusing on today. Brucella suis mostly affects reindeer, but some cattle and bison. And then Brucellus melitensis, which is primarily affecting goats, but not present in the U.S., so it's not very important to us. So the body systems and the symptoms that affect the cattle, there's no effective way to detect infected animals but by their appearance alone, but the diagnosis can be done by laboratory testing of blood or milk samples or laboratory culture of Brucella abortus just from the placenta or the vaginal discharge or the milk of the affected cow. The most obvious signs in pregnant animals are abortion or birth of weak calves. Calves from affected cows may have latent infections. They are not detected until they reach maturity and become pregnant or abort or give birth. So it's really hard to tell when there are calves to see if they are affected with these viruses unless you do laboratory testing. So how is it contracted? Transmission can occur from various types of things, just coming in contact, but it really comes down to the ingestion of these organisms, such as the bacteria, which can be found in fetuses or in fetal membranes. Cattle can ingest contaminated feed or water or may lick parts of a contaminated animal. Sometimes I saw a lot where if a cow is given birth in the field and maybe another cow comes up and starts, lick on the calf or the placenta that has been placed on the ground, then it could contract it from that as well. So it's really important to make sure you get your cattle tested before you bring them into the field with other cattle, because it could really be a costly disease for your farm. So for the normal reproductive physiology, I think Brucella really affects the pregnancy process. So I think I'm going to focus on talking about the healthy process of a healthy pregnancy rather than just a healthy reproductive tract, because then you'll get a little bit more sense of what Brucella actually does. So the female reproductive tract is made up of 2 ovaries, 2 oviducts, a uterine body, cervix, vagina, and a vulva. And the effects of bovine brucellosis mainly occur during the pregnancy of the cow, like I mentioned earlier. So that's one thing I want to focus on. But there's basically 5 stages to the pregnancy. You have ovulation. They come into heat, fertilization, embryo development, and birth. So the first thing I want to talk about is the ovulation process. So oocytes are these microscopic and found in ovaries. As they become ready for ovulation, a follicle forms, which we learned about in Animal Science 101. And the mature follicle, referred to as the Graafian follicle, will produce high levels of estradiol, which this reaches peak at ovulation. And the estradiol it reaches peak at ovulation, the Graafian follicle ruptures, and the ovulation takes place. So this structure becomes a corpus hemorrhagicum, and then that heals and grows into a corpus luteum. And then that CL produces progesterone, which supports the pregnancy. So the first part of that is ovulation. Then they come into heat. So when the female is basically ready to be bred, it's called coming into heat, which occurs very closely to the proximity of ovulation. This lets males know that they're ready to be bred and will stand to be bred. The sperm will obviously travel to the oviduct where the site of fertilization will take place. And if the female's oocyte is fertilized, she will become pregnant and the embryo will implant into the wall of the uterus. So now that we have an embryo made, we're just going to talk about a little bit how about this embryo is developed into a bigger fetus. So the fetus develops within 2 layers of the fetal membrane. You have the amnion and the chorioallantois. The cotyledonary attachment is where the inner surface of the uterine wall is covered with nodules called caruncles, which is the actual site attachment of the placenta, and the maternal side, so the side of the mother, not the fetus, is the choriontellus, is the side away from the fetus, and are structures called cotyledons that form attachments to caruncles. Now, these are very, very important because these cotyledons are structures that help nutrients and gases and important things that the fetus needs to grow. It passes them from the mother to the fetus, so it is a very important structure in the embryo development process. And then birth. Embryo begins to grow into a fetus, and then 9 months later, the calf gets big enough where it puts pressure on the cervix, releases oxytocin, and that stimulates uterine contractions. And this is one of our healthy calves that we had born here at my farm just a couple weeks ago. And just thought I'd put a picture on there to see what a healthy calf looks like. So we talked about a little bit about the normal reproductive tract of a female. Now let's talk about a normal male reproductive tract. So there's 4 main parts of the male reproductive system. You got the testicles, epididymis, the vas deferens, and the urethra. So I'm going to first talk about the testicles. So the testicles are located outside of the body cavity, and it has 2 functions. They produce sperm, and they produce the male hormone testosterone. So outside the body is an essential part of the sperm production, because the sperm must be made at like a lower temperature than the actual body cavity. So having that external pouch for the scrotum for the testicles to dwell in is very important for sperm production. These testicles contain many long, tiny coiled tubes known as seminiferous tubules, which within the sperm are formed and begin to mature. The epididymis is a compact structure closely attached to one side of the testicle. There's many tubules that converge to the head of the epididymis, which helps them transport, obviously, the sperm from the testicles to the vas deferens, and the sperm is also stored here. The vas deferens, this is a tubule from the epididymis into the body cavity, so it's really important for the transport of the sperm into the body cavity. And then the urethra is the vas deferens conversion to the urethra, which is a passageway through the penis into the external environment. So let's talk about a little bit of kind of the effects of brucella. I've talked about the healthy reproductive tract and pregnancy of a female. Now I want to talk to you about what this bacteria actually does to the female pregnancy. So the bacteria Brucella abortus is contracted, and it infects the reproductive tract of the female and males. The bacterium in the female reproductive tract causes inflammatory lesions on the placenta, causing placentitis, which can lead to a late abortion or birth of a live or infected calf, which was what one of the symptoms is. And that's the reason, is because these inflammatory regions on the placenta can cause these late abortions. But the main infection affects the cotyledons, which I talked to you about. The cotyledons are very important for the pregnancy process because it delivers the nutrients to the fetus, which is needed for fetal growth. So these cotyledons are thickened and look very leathery and loss of normal reddish appearance. They become very congested and swollen, and this is very fatal to the fetus because, that's the passageway for transporting nutrients and gases. So when these cotyledons become infected and swollen, it cuts off and reduces the transportation of nutrients. And this stops giving the nutrients to the fetus, which obviously is going to result in an abortion because this fetus has nothing to grow on. And so that's what causes the late-term abortion. The affected male physiology. In Brucella abortus, infection in bulls causes scrotal swelling. This causes the epididymis to have inflammatory changes. So the swelling of the testes limits the stretching and restricts the flow. So when the scrotum swells, it restricts the arterial flow, causing obstruction to the blood supply to the testes, which sometimes testicular necrosis will start to be seen, where the tissue of the testes will start to deteriorate because there's no blood being supplied there. So if there's no blood being supplied there, we know that oxygen can't get there, and without oxygen, tissue is going to start to die. And the inflammation of smooth muscle also results, and extreme dense adhesions between the parietal and visceral layers. And with this limited blood supply and adhesions, the tissues start to die and the spermatozoa cannot be produced, which results in sterility. Talking about a little bit of the treatments and prevention, the one thing that makes brucellosis so costly and detrimental is that it can't be treated once contracted. So an important thing to do is if you have new calves on the farm, it's important to vaccinate them. I think it'll pay off in the long run. And if you're getting any new cattle from the stockyard or from another farm, it's always a good habit to get them tested for brucellosis before letting them go free with your own herd. This just helps you from not infecting your own herd and losing more money. And this is my works cited page for my disease on brucellosis.